Orla O'Sullivan. You're a leading authority in microbiome research. You're a senior computational biologist in Teagasc Food Research Centre, a principal investigator with SFI Research Centres Vista Milk and APC Microbiome Ireland. You graduated from UCC with a BSc in biochemistry and subsequently a PhD in bioinformatics. In 2019, you were the recipient of the SFI Early Career Research of the Year, having been awarded an SFI Starting Investigator Research Grant and the APC Junior Scientist of the Year in 2015. In 2018, you were on the highly cited researcher list, which is the top 1% in the world, I gather, of citations. So thanks so much for talking to us today. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Anne.
So I suppose before we get into your, what I find absolutely fascinating research around the microbiome, I'd love to hear a little bit of your journey about how you got to here, how you got to where you are today and where you're from.
Yeah, as you can tell by my accent, I'm from Cork, Cork City. I always count myself very lucky that from a very young age I knew what I wanted. Not that I suppose, you know, when you're 4 or 5 you don't know what science is, but I always wanted to know why, how. I questioned everything, and I think, like, now that I have my own kids, you can see how frustrating or how annoying that can be for a parent. But I questioned everything always, so I always knew I wanted to be a scientist or a science of some sort. Even in secondary school, it was all science subjects I wanted to do. Did all science for my leaving cert. You know, there was never a doubt in my mind that it was science. Now, in actual fact, I wanted to do medicine, and that was my preference doing my leaving cert. Slightly missed it on the points, and did question going back to repeat my leaving cert, but I was very young doing my leaving cert. I'd only just turned 17, so I chose to go into UCC under biological sciences, and my intention was to do postgrad medicine, but found my love of research, found it was research I loved more than medicine, I guess, as I moved through. And I suppose through a fortunate event now, I had to have multiple knee surgeries during college and was on crutches, so was given a bioinformatics 4th year project. And at that point, didn't know what bioinformatics was. It wasn't part of our curriculum in the previous 3 years, so was given a project with Professor Des Higgins. And it was the evolution of an archaebacteria, and I still remember the project now. And yeah, it got me hooked. I'd always loved maths, I always loved biology, and I never knew that there was an area of science that married the two of them. And that's probably telling my age now as well, that I never knew what bioinformatics was, but that's where it ended. So being on crutches led me to bioinformatics.
Serendipity.
Yeah, and I did my PhD actually in developmental bioinformatics, so it's looking at novel software, developing new tools, and I guess towards the end of the 4 years I kind of realized I missed the biology, so I missed the application of the tools. I missed understanding what the tool was doing, being able to see the outcome, and that's what led me back into microbiome research. So I guess using the bioinformatics tools now that other people have developed to get the biological question, the biological answer out. And I guess, yeah, you know, I am one of those, as cliche as it sounds, I love my job, and I'm really lucky, and I count myself really lucky every day.
And we'll come back a little bit actually to the technology and the bioinformatics, because I think it's so interesting and I'd love to hear more. But tell us a bit about the microbiome, you know, for any of our viewers who aren't hugely clear on microbiome and the kind of research that's going on around it. Tell us a bit about
I guess
its importance.
I guess the microbiome is I guess a lot of people will know about the gut microbiome. When you turn on your television now, you know, you see ads for the gut microbiome nearly on every ad break, if people still watch ad breaks. You hear about the skin microbiome, but in actual fact, the microbiome is everywhere. So what the microbiome is a collection of microorganisms, not just bacteria. You're looking at fungi, viruses, protozoa, eukaryotes that function together in whatever environment they're in. So you have microbiomes in food, in the soil, in the air, in water, and in every part of the human body. And then subsequently every animal will have their own microbiome as well. So, you know, it's an area of research that spans from soil to fork. It spans every environment across the planet.
And then tell us a little bit about some of the projects you're working on at the moment, whether it's but maybe tell us what you're doing at Teagasc as well, and maybe explain what Teagasc is for our international
so Teagasc is
readers.
the Irish Agriculture and Food Research area. So there's an agricultural arm and a food arm, and the idea is that we perform research that will benefit the Irish dairy industry, but Irish farmers and the Irish public in general. So I work in food biosciences, which again is very varied, and I think that's why working in an area of the microbiome, and maybe that's what keeps my passion and my love for it, is that my daily work, my projects are so varied. So I work with looking at the gut microbiome of elite athletes, and at the same time I'm looking at the soil microbiome. So you kind of, the tools that you use are the same, you're just applying them to different environments. So you get to ask loads of different questions every single day. So, you know, when I'm looking at the gut microbiome of athletes, I'm looking at how does changing their gut microbiome improve their performance or, you know, aid muscle recovery. Whereas when I'm looking at the soil, then we're looking at how can the soil microbiome help climate change, you know, so how can the carbon sequestration, nitrogen fixation, even looking at the antimicrobial resistance profile of the soil, and is that getting into our food in any way? So it's like, you know, it's so varied, it's fascinating.
It's incredibly varied, isn't it? So, and you're working with 2 SFI centres.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about those 2.
So I've worked with APC Microbiome Ireland for a long time. I guess when I started back into the microbiome research area, that APC was like one of the first, it was the first one in the first round of SFI research centres. So my research within APC focuses on the gut microbiome and particularly on athletes. So we look at, like, you know, the microbes in your gut, you know, help every function of the human body, from immunity to satiety, hormone regulation. There's a gut-brain axis now that we never knew, that we didn't know existed 20 years ago, you know. So old sayings like butterflies in your stomach or, you know, gut instinct are actually true. Like, you know, the microbes in your gut can regulate your mood and, you know, feed into that. So I guess I'm a huge sports fan. I've always been a huge sports fan. So for me to get the opportunity to work with sports teams like the IRFU, Cricket Ireland, and now we're working with a Premiership soccer team, and it's just like, it's an amazing opportunity from a personal level to kind of live out childhood dreams and be able to kind of, I don't know, can we say we help them improve their performance, but at least you kind of feel like you're doing something. And what we found with the athletes, I guess the rugby team in particular, is that what we don't really know yet what a healthy microbiome is in the gut. So we couldn't tell you that if you have X, Y, Z microbes in your gut, that makes you healthy. But what we can say is that the more different types of microbes you have in your gut, the more different functions they perform. So the healthier you are because you have a diversity of function. You have a diversity of function to keep you healthy. What drives that is diversity in the food that you eat. So when we were looking at the rugby players, what we found is that their microbial diversity was far superior to regular Joes, so people that weren't exercising, and that the functions that their microbes were performing was around muscle recovery, protein breakdown, stuff that would assist in an athlete's performance and recovery from exertion.
Amazing, incredible, really. And why do you think the rugby players had such diversity? Is it?
Yeah, so we did a follow-on study. So we wanted to see, was it like their fitness levels was driving this? Was it their diet? Was anything that we could figure out? What we got correlation. So there are statistical correlations, and so they're not definitive answers. But we found that the diversity correlated with the level of protein in an athlete's diet and the level of this enzyme called creatine kinase, which is released from muscles post exertion. So we kind of hypothesized that it was either the level of protein in their diet or their fitness levels that was driving this healthy gut. But in a subsequent intervention study we did, where we put couch potatoes on an intervention trial for 8 weeks of exercise or 8 weeks of high protein, there was no change in their microbiome.
Oh my goodness.
So I guess that led us to a new hypothesis that it was a chronic level of fitness, a chronic adaptation to this fitness level that led these athletes to have such high diversity in their guts. So in other words, like a fad exercise program isn't going to make you an elite athlete, you know.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, unfortunately for the rest of us. Yeah,
I was going to say. And then the other centre is, let me get this right, the
Vistamilk.
The Vistamilk,
yeah.
exactly.
So Vistamilk is a newer SFI centre, so it's a dairy by design. So it's looking at ways that we can improve and assist the Irish dairy industry. So we look at the microbiome. So I suppose my role in the Vistamilk Centre is looking at microbiomes. So we look at the microbiome from soil to fork. So we're looking at how the microbes in your soil, what the profile, and it's a very new area, the microbiome in soil, which is I suppose when I look at the gut microbiome, it's very well defined what software you should use, whereas the soil is fascinating to us as bioinformaticians because we have to learn how to look at it and what are the best tools to look at it, what databases we should be using. So the data coming out of it is kind of more unknown. So it's a researcher's dream, I guess, to maybe my PhD student Rose wouldn't be saying that to me now, but you know, it's a great area to work in because it's, you know, again, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And you know, it's nice to have these challenges. So we're looking at, the profile of Irish soil from a microbial perspective, how that changes based on the location around Ireland and how the function of that soil changes, whether, you know, it being Cork or Sligo or, you know, based on the environment that it's in. We're very interested in looking at the antibiotic resistance profile of that soil because a lot of antibiotics were actually discovered in the soil. So we want to see, you know, if different soil management is changing the profiles of the soil. And then subsequently, like the ambition would be to see, are these antibiotics following the food chain? So are they going into the grass, into the ruminants, into the milk and into, you know, and that's just kind of the grand plan, horizon scanning and everything, you know, into the future. And we're also looking at developing novel dairy products that will, you know, say if we look at an elite athlete, can we make a novel dairy product that can help their guts even better? Or if you have, you know, a non-athlete fitness wants to improve their fitness, can then take this dairy product to mimic or to aid their gut microbiome and their gut health as well. So, you know, I guess there are two of the projects, but like looking at the microbiome of food, we can use the microbes to change the flavour of food. Fermented food is a very huge kind of area at the moment, so it's huge health benefits to fermented foods, and that's all driven by the microbes in the food. So that's another area that we're looking at. So you change the microbiome profile, you can change the health benefits of the food, change the flavour profile, even change the look of cheese by changing the microbes.
Incredible.
In the food, yeah.
And that kind of neatly brings us back to that whole area of how technology has changed research, I suppose. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I suppose specifically we're talking about bioinformatics and that mixture of biology and maths and, you know, the data sets that can be used out there. So tell me a little bit about your own view about how technology has changed everything.
Yeah, I can actually remember going in to do my fourth year project, and so I was around the year 2000. It was like the big computers with the big back, not flat screens. They had the big monitors with the big square backs, and you were able to do the results. And I can remember I was able to print out every image that I was going to use was printed out, and they were like, you know, evolutionary trees is what I was looking at, and hand printed them and put them in, and it was all able to run on this tiny little desktop computer. And now it's, you know, we work on like 10 node clusters with, you know, 100 terabyte of memory, and that's still not enough power to run. Like some of our microbiome analysis runs for months, you know, just to look at it. So again, in my time, even the microbiome analysis done based on DNA sequencing. So a DNA sequencer, so you extract the DNA And then the DNA sequencer, depending on which one you use, there's like, multiple different companies that run it. And when this started, it was a 454 sequencer that we were using, and that would give you about 500 base pairs and about 1,000 reads. So now we're looking at, NovaSeq's, NextSeq's, that are giving like millions and millions of reads, like 200-300 base pairs. So you're going from getting maybe 1,000 reads per sample up to millions. But it's an exponential growth that's still constantly growing. And in that time, the computing power has had to increase accordingly. So, to be able to run it on your own laptop, you now have to, run it on huge Linux clusters. So
wait till we get quantum.
Yeah, and it's evolving very fast. We now also have handheld sequencers, so they're called minions. So they look like a USB, and even USBs have gotten so small, but like they're about this size, so the size of a USB key. And so you can bring them out onto, so if you want to do a soil sample, bring them out onto the farmer's field, bring them into a hospital environment eventually, and then do the sequencing remotely.
Wow.
On a handheld sequencer. Not to the same
No, of course.
sequencing, but like it is all, possible for the future.
It's incredible, isn't it? The change it's made is incredible. And I mean, if you were talking to somebody who had who was early on in their career and they were thinking bioinformatics, why would I do that? Would you have any advice for them?
Well, I think the world is driven by data. It definitely is. And I think a lot of people have, what I've noticed, and particularly girls that come in through our offices, into the labs, you have this fear of computers, this fear of data, the fear of maths. And but I think bioinformatics isn't really that scary. It's unraveling data. Like, the answers you get is amazing, but I don't necessarily think that you need to understand the ins and outs of bioinformatics either. It's far more important to be able to interpret the results that are coming out of these software tools. So like, that's a far bigger power than being able to run a software program. For this particular area, to be able to interpret the results that are given out by a piece of software. And learning the software isn't as scary as it thinks. And I think people, once we kind of, get people over that fear factor of a black screen, because the vast majority of bioinformatics is done in a Linux environment, which is the black screen. It's not a click button environment, because once you get past that and understand that you are really just telling, it's shorthand English. So you're just telling it to open file, and it's not as scary. And I do think that young girls, and I'm emphasizing girls because it's a male-dominated area of science, and I think it's very important for young girls. The social media has actually helped, because I think they're much more tech savvy than we ever were growing up. They don't have a fear, and I see my 5-year-old, my 12-year-olds, and they're just what they were able to do now on iPads and thing. And my hope would be that girls won't be as scared to get into the more tech oriented areas of science.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? That they become so much more technical, whether they realise it or not, young women as well as young men. One thing I wanted to ask you is, in that whole area of the microbiome, and because Ireland is, has a real agricultural heritage and all the rest of it, so particularly when we're talking about farming and teagasc and the soil and all the rest of it, I mean, does Ireland kind of punch above its weight, or are you hopeful for successes coming out of Ireland?
Absolutely. I mean, Irish dairy exports, we export to hundreds of countries around the world. Like, Ireland has an amazing reputation when it comes to science, when it comes to food industry, and I think the collaboration, and I think that's one thing that Science Foundation Ireland has done really well, is foster this collaboration between and promoted Irish research so well. And when it comes to microbiome research, I mean, so many of the top scientists, microbiome researchers around the world, are based in Ireland. If you look at the research, APC, Vista Milk, every top scientist list that comes out, there's representatives from those research centres on these lists. And Ireland is a go-to place. I actually remember when I was doing my PhD that we were always told, you have to leave Ireland to get experience, to come back in order to be considered a well-rounded good scientist, but that proviso isn't there anymore because now we do such good research in Ireland that it's always good to spread your wings and gain experience, but it's not a, you know, if you're looking at somebody's CV now, you're not going to say, well, that person never left Ireland.
It's not a prerequisite anymore, isn't it?
No,
wonderful?
Definitely not. Yeah.
That is fantastic. If you were to look back now, and you're still a young woman, but your career to date, like would you have highlights or even a highlight that you would pick out to date that really?
Oh, there is a lot to choose. Well, luckily, I'm very lucky in that there is a lot to choose from. I have to say, working with athletes will always be, from a personal sports fan, that, you know, to be given those opportunities. I love that, and I guess I can't go past the SFI Early Career Researcher Award. I mean, if we look at the other candidates and the other people that have won it over the years, to be put in the same sentence as those people is an honour. And I remember the year I won it, it was Lydia Lynch and other two female scientists, and it was, you know, to see, you know, female scientists winning it is just, it's great, you know.
Fantastic. And another thing that we always ask people in these interviews, because I think it's nice to get a rounded view of people, is there something about yourself that we might not expect or that we might be surprised by?
Something that surprises me a lot is the amount of time I spend in dance halls with my children, because I'm as you gathered from my talk, I'm a huge sports fan. I grew up playing sports, and I never would have thought that my children would be dance kids, but yeah, I do spend and it's very like the Dance Mom program, which people, you know, it's very intense, it's loud freestyle, disco type music that's very fast, very loud, very intense, crazy costumes, everything, but look, they love it, and it's phenomenal fitness as well, like, you know, and, you know, a great sport for them to be involved in, but never thought I'd be the one who'd be a dance mom, so I guess it surprises me, so it should surprise everybody else as well.
I love it, I love it. So again, I suppose, and I've asked you this to some extent before, but I mean, just to kind of to wrap up, for aspiring scientists and researchers out there, if you had one piece of advice for them that, you know, to encourage them in their career.
I would say talk to people, look for help, look for mentors. I think everyone is willing to help you. Everyone will want to share experiences, will want to help you get a step up on the ladder. And I'd say apply for grants, apply for everything. You will get more rejections than positives. Everybody does. And I know rejection is hard, but you can't get the new grants without the rejections. And I'd so I think that, like, put yourself out there, ask for help, you know, get yourself a good mentor and do it. Like, science will bring you anywhere in the world. It travels very well, and allows you to travel as well. So I think that would be my advice, yeah.
I think that's great advice. Orla O'Sullivan, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me on.